Our epistle reading for February the 20th, 2022 comes from Paul's letter to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, 35 through 38, and then continuing on with 42 through 50. Now, Paul has just made the argument to the Corinthians that Jesus is the first fruit of the resurrection. And then he promises that we will all experience the resurrection, so we will all therefore be harvested in that last day. But then the question becomes, well, what about those who are already decaying? What about their bodies? I mean, Jesus was raised on the third day. The body hadn't started decaying yet, but what about those that have been in the grave for a while? How's there going to be a bodily resurrection? Oh, that's going to not look good. It's kind of like a bad zombie movie with all these people coming up. What about for us? What about those who've died sea travel? Those who have died in fire? Those who have died during wars? What about all of those innocent people in the towers in 9/11 when that whole tower burned? What about their bodies? What do you say about a bodily resurrection? And Paul tries to answer this by saying that our flesh is just a shell. Our flesh is a shell from dust. We were made from dust. We shall return to dust. And this shell that we have, this physical body, cannot inherit the eternal kingdom of God. God is infinite. And therefore we must shed this perishable skin in order to put on imperishability. He'll say in another place that what we have been has not yet been revealed, but we know that when Christ appears, we'll be like him. That this resurrected body doesn't necessarily look like our physical bodies, but rather it is a spiritual body that looks like the physical, but not really the physical. There's good news and bad news with this, because Paul's argument sets up a dilemma. He makes the argument so strong that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, that only our spiritual beings can inherit the kingdom of God, that he seems to negate the value of God's created flesh. God made us. God made creation. We are made in the image of God. Imago Dei. When God made creation, made blood and flesh, made our temporal forms, he said that it was good. God said that it was good. And what Paul drives at here in order to try to unravel what the resurrection might look like puts a big question mark on this physical body. He does the same thing when he argues in Romans about the flesh and the spirit. Our physical desires versus our spiritual desires. And yet, he terms it in terms of flesh. Sarxes, the physical flesh of the body. And almost sounds like he negates the flesh. This has led to self-deprecation, flagellation. It has led to Gnosticism within the early Christian church, caused heresy upon heresy, that the spiritual is not somehow connected to the physical. We have the saying, we are spiritual bodies living in a physical form. Or are we physical bodies living in a spiritual form? Can we really separate the two? Do we not need both? How can we perceive the beauty and glory of God without our eyes? Without our ears, without our senses. Our senses reveal to us the spiritual reality behind everything. It's like taking empathy out of an individual. We need both. Our spiritual being affects our physical being. Our physical being affects our spiritual being. When we break those two apart, then we run into heresy, denying God created all things good and the goodness of creation, and therefore the need to alleviate suffering. Jesus says, place your hand in these wounds, Thomas. Know that I'm real. Well, how can Thomas place his hands in the wounds of a spiritual body if Jesus wasn't flesh? And then the argument goes, well, he was flesh during that time, but then at the ascension, he took on his spiritual being. Paul is describing a mystery. We will all be raised. We will all be with God. What our bodies will look like, we do not know. Will we be 20 years old? Will we be 16 years old? Will we be the age when we died? We do not know. But we know that we will be as God created us. And in the presence of God, our physical, spiritual, whatever form we're in, will not matter compared to the glory of the awareness of God and those around us. Paul's saying here gives comfort for those who are not able to recover their loved one's body, knowing that their loved one will be with them in heaven. But like I just said, it opens up a lot of difficulties. Let us remember that Paul is speaking of spiritual things, of things that have not yet happened. When it happens, we'll trust that God will take care of the details.